Welcome to the third part of our tutorial, How to MindSphere. On the third part of our tutorial, we're going to be explaining how to communicate your app with the Siemens MindSphere P3. To show you how to communicate your app with the MindSphere, we're going to start by showing you how the information and communication flow between our app and the MindSphere works. Our app is divided in two main parts, Backend and Frontend. Backend being the Node.JS server running on the cloud, and Frontend being the HTML, AES, JavaScript interface that we see on the browser. At the end of the day, our goal is to be able to show on the frontend some of the data that we have been storing on the MindSphere. How this usually works is that we are on our frontend, on the interface, we click on something or we expect to see some information. This generates an event or a request. Frontend sends a request to the backend. Backend processes the request and goes to read the necessary data from the MindSphere database through the MindSphere API. Backend takes this data, send it to our frontend, and frontend display it. Now, this would be some standard app cloud communication, but in the case of the MindSphere, we have two security layers, and one between frontend and backend, and one between backend and database. In this video, we are going to explain how they work. To exchange information between frontend and backend, we are going to use sockets. Sockets are internal nodes to send and receive data, and the good thing for us is that there is already a socket library with a lot of instructions that we can use. What we need to do now is to open a socket connection between frontend and backend. For a regular server-client communication, we could open the socket connection with only these two code lines. We get the host location and we put it in this instruction to connect the socket to the server. However, for the MindSphere we need to add a certain token, a certain key to the location so that we can connect this socket to the server. Where can we get this token? Well, when we open the app through the MindSphere, the site doesn't only charge what we are seeing on the screen, but also a couple of cookies. One of those cookies is the token we are looking for, the one with the name XSRF-token. Okay, so now how do we get this token value? This token is the security layer between frontend and backend that we were talking about before. Now we need to get this token value somehow in a programming level. So we're going to show you how we did it. We create this function, getCookie, which only needs a name, and what it does is basically it goes and retrieves the list of cookies from the site, and later when we have the list, it runs within this loop a couple of iterations till we find the correct name of the cookie, and it returns a cookie value. Now that we have our token value, we only need to concatenate the host location with this little string in the middle and the token value. When we have all of that in a single variable, we can go ahead and open a socket connection with the MindSphere, and the MindSphere is going to know that we are authorized to do that. Once that we have successfully opened a socket connection with our backend, we can go ahead and use normal socket instructions to communicate backend and frontend. It's important to remember that we need to add to our HTML file the sockets.io library, and in our case also the file where we program the getCookie function. Next we're going to talk about communication between backend and MindSphere database. First thing we need to do is, on our server side, we need to do the sockets handle, which means that once that we open our connection with the frontend through sockets, we're going to receive a request from the frontend, meaning that they want to receive some data from the backend. In this case, we're gonna, with this function MindSphere API getTimeSeries, we're gonna go get the information from the MindSphere database and return it through the socket. Now we need to go get the data that Frontend needs. And for that, the first thing we need to do is to create our URLTimeSeries path. With this path, the time series, or MindSphere Database, is going to know what data exactly are we requesting. This path has a very specific format that we can find if we go to the Siemens developer site, Siemens MindSphere developer site, under How to Time Series. As we can see here, this is the path that we need to have. The path has a really specific format. It's getaway, the region where we are, MindSphere.io APA, IO time series, v3 time series, and then the asset ID and the aspect name, where our variables are stored in the MindSphere. If we want, we can also add a time range, like here. It's the same path, but at the end we add from when to when, with this specific time format that you can also understand if you come to this site. We can also add, we can say which variables do we want if we add this part at the end of the path. So as you can see, this has a very specific format, and until asset ID and aspect name, the path can be hard-coded because it will always remain the same, but from then we need to change according to the variables, aspect, asset that we need. So it's better for us if we make a function for it. We're going to show you what we did. So for that we created a variable time series URL base, which is the hard-coded part that is never going to change from the path. In this case, EU1 is the region for Europe. And now we created a function to create the URLTimeSeries path, and it needs the asset ID, the aspect name, from when to when, and the variables that we want. What it basically does is it concatenates the path. It takes the time series URL base, then adds the asset ID, then the aspect name, then it creates a variable with all the variable names separated by commas, and then add from when to when, and the variable names, just with the format that the time series need. Now that we have the time series path, we only need one more thing to be able to get data from the MindSphere, and that is the authorization header. The authorization header is the second security layer we were talking about before, the one between backend and database. We need to get it first on our server side and store it to send it back later with the time series / data request. In our case, we are saving it to our MindSphere API library. We need to request to get the authorization header, and this authorization header we're going to save it on our MindSphere API library under the attribute auth header. Now on our library side, we need to make a function to get a request from the MindSphere API. First, we're going to declare a request variable as a superagent module, which is a module from Node.js. Then we're going to do the getRequest function, which takes the time series path, the auth header, and returns finally the data that we want. What it does during the request is it gets the time series path, it sets the authorization header or own authorization header to the authorization header that we got before. It set a header to accept and the data format that we want, in this case a JSON, and it returns the data. Okay, now that we have all of this, we are ready to see information flow overview as a whole. So we start in our frontend, and from our frontend we're going to send a query to this socket, request MindSphere API. The query is going to have the variable names, the variable that we want, from when to when do we want the data. We are now on our server side. We receive the query through the socket and use the information from the query to fill our TimeSeries function with asset ID, aspect name, from when, to when, and variable names. The last three come from the query. The asset ID, we can get it from the launchpad. We go to Asset Manager, we open the asset that we want and copy the last part from the link. That is our asset ID, and the aspect name is just like that, the aspect name. What does the getTimeSeries function do? Well, it takes all the info that we receive from the query and use it to form the TimeSeries path. Then it uses the TimeSeries path to make a request to the MindSphere database with a request function, and it returns the JSON file with all the data. So now that we have on our server side all the data that was requested to the MindSphere database, we send it through our socket to the frontend. And once that we have it on the frontend, it is finally ready to be displayed in a nice way on our app. That was the third part of our tutorial, How to MindSphere. How to communicate your app to the MindSphere. We hope that this video was of any help for you, and thank you very much for watching.